welcome back. For many couples, arguing is a regular means of clearing the air, but experts now believe that parents who row in front of their children and fail to resolve the issue risk leaving them with long-term mental health problems.
Researchers found it's not the argument that's to blame, it's how you argue that can have the impact on your child. With us now are journalists Sally Jones and Liz Fraser, whose opinions differ on whether little ears should ever hear their parents arguing. So, Liz, let's begin with you. Should we argue in front of our kids?
Ideally, we would not argue in front of our children, and ideally, we would never argue at all, and the whole world would be lovely. But we have to remember what we're doing when we're raising children, right? And we're trying to teach them how the world works, so that when they're not in our home, in the cosy world that we're creating for them, they can deal with the world. And like it or not, arguing and disagreeing with people and having confrontation is a part of life, and they will experience it at some time, whether it's at school or at work, perhaps with a colleague or something. And we need to prepare them for that. So if children hear their parents arguing and shouting at each other, which is not nice at all, and it's upsetting. We all remember it from childhood, you know, sitting upstairs and your whole body kind of clamps in, thinking, oh, God, my mum and dad are going to kill each other or get divorced or something. It's actually very helpful, oddly enough, for children to have experience of this.
Well, the research says it's not.
If you do it right. Well, actually, no. The research says that it depends on how you argue. I did a discussion just the other day with one of the people who was involved in writing the report, actually, and she was very clear on that. And she said it's not... And this really is the take-home message today for parents watching this. It's not to say that if you argue with your partner in front of your children, you're going to stunt their growth and damage them. Really, that's not the message we should be learning. It's that how you argue is important, and resolving an argument is so important, because if children don't see that the argument then comes to an end, that you make up, you know, you're releasing a lot of people into the world who think an argument is the end of the world. You know, the argument is not the end of the world. Actually, that's how people often make progress and get to know each other better. So it's how you argue is really the critical thing here.
Sally?
I really think that when children are very young, they can't actually distinguish between what's a good bit of knockabout fun and the normal sort of guerrilla low-level sort of arguments that we might have with our husband, and whether or not, you know, they're about to get divorced or kill one another. I mean, I was a kid in the early 60s, and I can remember lying in bed being absolutely terrified when my parents, who were incredibly loving and devoted, they'd have the occasional little spat. I would hear raised voices, and there was such a stigma over divorce. I'd be convinced that they were going to get split up, that we'd never see them again, and I would actually cry.
But they
during
didn't.
Those periods.
That was the point, though.
They
didn't. So...
But you cannot distinguish at that age. Fair enough later on. I mean, I've been married 24 years. You know, my husband and I quite often argue these days, but we try very much. Well, we've always argued, but we try very much to do it out of earshot, particularly when they were younger.
But when you say out of earshot, I mean, your parents did do it out of earshot, but you were upstairs still listening.
They weren't out of earshot. I mean, I expect if they'd thought about it, they would have known that raised voices would be heard.
But actually,
upstairs.
that's a really important point that you've raised there, because I think parents feel that it would be better for their children to sort of do it out of their sight. So children are upstairs, and now we're going to have a row, and it's OK because they're not here, they're not watching it. That is so upsetting to children if they're not, you know, if they don't understand what's happening. So you've got the child sitting upstairs who can hear absolutely everything that's going on, and they're worrying about it. Much, much healthier is for every so often this very normal thing to happen, which is two people who are stressed and exhausted and all of that have an argument. It's very important for children to understand, yes, this is happening. OK, I'm not going to pretend that this isn't happening. This is happening. We're having an argument. We're going to make up afterwards. And that's what happens.
But the whole point of an argument is that it's not that controlled. I mean, you've just said that in a way that it seems very, very controlled. I mean, is it not the fact that you might as well have a discussion then, which would be much healthier, wouldn't it?
There are ways of arguing. We have arguments, and I try, and I think my husband sometimes, not always, but we try to make it more of a discussion than an argument, even though there's a fair bit of sort of elbow and jockeying for position, as there always is with these things. But I think that the way you argue, and whether you make a general point, if you say, you're such a whatever, you always, or, you know, you've got moss coming out of your wallet, you're so mean, you always do this. You're much better, I think, to focus on the actual thing that you want to say. If you're worried about your husband not pulling their weight with bringing the children back from school, I think that there are ways and ways of doing it. You can say, you lazy,
yeah, but
you're so
we're human,
lazy.
though. We are human, and I mean, I'm going to put my hand up as a normal person who says, yeah, I lose my temper sometimes. I do, and it's not good, and I'm not proud of it. But I think it's important for viewers not to feel really bad. That yes, we'd like to have discussions and make this a sort of thing. Yeah, I've slammed doors, I've thrown things, really, because I'm a normal.
But let me just say here. You said you spoke to someone who was involved in the report.
Yes.
And you just said then that you didn't want to make parents feel guilty.
Yes.
Well, the report says that the exposure to family feuds over time can cause physical problems in youngsters, such as headaches, stomach pains, and can even affect their growth.
Yes.
Well, if having an argument in front of your children doesn't make you feel guilty now...
Exactly, and that was read out, and she was very quick to explain that you have to be so careful when you take these little sound bites. You know, you don't want someone listening this morning to think, oh, my God, I had a row with my husband this morning, I'm going to stunt my child's growth. Yes, over prolonged periods of intense internalisation and nerves, it can affect your entire body, yes, and cause very serious consequences, but that's the extreme. We're not talking about that. We're talking about normal couples at home arguing, and we must remember not to do each other down. That's important in arguments.
But I've seen children totally robbed of their self-esteem because they've been in the middle of parental rows, regular parental rows. They've either been used as pawns or they've felt that they were somehow responsible for the arguments, where they were actually just being used to score points off the other one. And very often this is carried well on to their 30s, their 40s. I've seen people who have seen their mothers nagging and nagging and nagging, or their fathers nagging and nagging, and they think that that's the way to conduct their relationships.
Can I say,
and that spills into every relationship.
I hear what you're saying, and I'm part of that generation as well, and I wonder whether that will change now, because I think that children who were raised in... I'm a 70s kid, you're maybe 60 kid, I don't know.
Kid, yeah.
I think our parents came from a generation where they really thought that they couldn't argue in front of their children, and we were very much the generation in the room hearing these arguments. And you're right, divorce was a very different thing then. It was frightening for a child, and I wonder actually whether
it's still terrifying now for a child. My world's falling apart. Everything's going to change.
Far more stressful now because there's so many more divorces.
Perhaps our children in 30 years won't look back and say it damaged my self-esteem, because my parents were much more upfront about it. And I will say again, you know, what I said right at the top of this discussion, arguing is actually it's a part of life, and it is useful for children. It is, you know, not every day, my goodness, we're not talking about shouting every day, but we mustn't be frightened to argue in front of our children.
But if life is stressful enough for a child growing up in this environment like now, we always say that this is the most stressful time for a youngster to being brought up. Why add to that by making their one safe...
We're not trying to.
No, I understand. And listen, I have arguments and the rest of it. I'm not saying, but I'm just bringing this up, is that why add to it? Why not create your safe haven at home when they witness arguments everywhere else? You only have to turn on the telly to see people shouting.
There are ways and ways of doing it, though. I mean, say one of you is a bit prone to outbursts and the other one is cooler. I find if somebody has the outburst, if the other one can actually just ignore it until the other one can come down from the outburst without losing face, and then eventually say, well, look, you really upset me with that outburst. Was it something else that was bothering you? Because what you were worried about seemed pretty trivial.
Good. Yeah, I think that's
so
very healthy.
It's not how you argue. It's not when you argue. It's how you argue.
How you argue and how you follow that up. That children have to understand. You know, OK, this is what happened. We had an argument. We're friends. We talk about it afterwards.
It's so good
but we mustn't. Burying things under the carpet is also really bad for children. You know, they're so perceptive. They know. Children know if there's this atmosphere. If you could just cut it with the knife, you know, you get children. They start biting their nails, they're tense. Much better to just be straight about this thing.
Final word.
I think you've got to discuss with the children. I mean, if they realise that there's bad blood going on, I've always found it was good to actually talk to them about how we dealt with it, what happened. And because if you keep that dialogue going with your children, they can then
it's part of being a parent, so that they know how to deal with it when they're in that situation in their own relationships.
Do you want your child to have their first argument at the age of 20 and not know how to deal with it?
Won't.
No, not at all.
They're going to see conflict before then. It's a case of how you do it.
We're going to stop there. Thank you very much.